Hello, BookTube. After an incredibly busy week, this is Weekly Reads. So I've had quite a few guests this week, or watching some children this week, that I'm not entirely sure how I managed to read as much as I did, but I did. I managed to accomplish quite a bit of reading, and I'm quite pleased with that. So, as I've mentioned a few times, my brother and sister-in-law have moved, or they're moving house. They've bought one, and they're working on it. They're fixing it up, getting ready to move. And me and my mom have been watching The Four Children of the Apocalypse, my two nieces and two nephews. We first started watching them last Friday on my birthday, which may or may not have contributed to me not having as pleasant a birthday as I would have liked. The kids, while generally starting off the day good, they get more and more exasperating as the hours tick by. And we watched them on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Thursday. So most of this week, we've had them. On Tuesday, my aunts came over to visit my mom for her birthday, which was yesterday on Veterans Day. So that was a pretty good visit, as it usually is. But let's stop talking about my week and let's talk about my books, because that's what I want to talk about. So as I mentioned last week in Weekly Reads, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about New Worlds November first and then NonFiction November second. And for those of you who don't know, New Worlds November is a new BookTube event in which participants read science fiction in the month of November. This year it is short fiction, and there are four prompts, four weekly prompts: aliens, robots and AI, time travel, and apocalyptic or dystopic. And I am one of the co-hosts. New Worlds November was created by the Bookish Bryants. And I kind of feel bad in a way, because I haven't really been as participatory in New Worlds November as I would like to be, but I mean, it's also NonFiction November, and I kind of wanted to spend more of my time on that, even though I am a co-host for New Worlds November. But anyway, explanations aside, let's talk about what I've been reading. So, I decided for my personal New Worlds November project to read a big anthology of science fiction short stories. And I wanted one that ran the gamut from earliest science fiction to more or less contemporary. And the anthologies I had in my collection at the time, before I bought the big book of science fiction edited by Anne and Jeff Vandermeer, was 20 years out of date. I mean, it was like 20 years ago, so there's 20 years worth of science fiction that wouldn't be in there. This book came out about 4 or 5 years ago, so it's more up to date. And I've heard quite a bit of good things about the big book of science fiction. Unfortunately, I'm darkening out. Can't really concur. Although, so far my reading from the big book of science fiction has been all that positive. Although, there are the caveats. I've struggled with fiction for nearly 2 years. So the first half of December 2019 was a gangbuster month for fiction, particularly fantasy. but then the later part of December, things started to go downhill. I pretty much did not get on with any of the fantasy I read at the end of December, and that slump largely has persisted since. It's incredibly rare that I read a work of fiction that I like in any genre. So there's that. Secondly, at the moment, all of these stories are vintage, early, or classic science fiction, and I don't really get on with vintage science fiction because they date for me, and it just doesn't work for me. And I know Shandi Stanfest, in his video this past Monday, talked about how a lot of science fiction writers, what they would do in their world building was make it give the readers of their time a way to sort of hook in. And I think that probably does contribute a bit to the sense of datedness. But that said, I read up to... so I'll start tomorrow with The Visitors by Arkady Boris Strugatsky. So the stories I've read from like Friday and then the weekend, there were two I actually did like, although for the most part I didn't particularly care for these stories. But I did like two, quite well, immensely. The Star Sealers by Edmund Hamilton. This is a space opera in which a mysterious mass of gravity is approaching the solar system. And a ship that Earth, as a member of Galactic Federation, has contributed to the Federation's military forces, has been recalled and is tasked to lead an armada of 50 ships to investigate. When they arrive, they discover that this mass gravity is a massive dead star that has been colonized by a sentient alien race who are essentially aiming to steal the solar system and I think colonize the sun and then destroy the other planets as needed. And of course, our heroes save the day. I really enjoyed it, even though obviously the science is laughable, but yeah. And some of the world building, I mean, it is quite dated, but I mean, I did quite enjoy it, surprisingly. And I also really enjoyed Clifford T. Simax's The Desertion, in which a colonial bureaucrat feeling guilt over sending people to die in an attempt to more fully colonize Jupiter, himself undergoes this transformation process that turns him into a Jovian being. And I love the sort of how Simak captures the sensory changes that overcome somebody who's undergone that change. So I really enjoyed it. Again, I mean, the science, the datedness of it. So, I mean, I did quite like it. And there are two stories that I think, now thinking back on it, I probably should give another look to at some point, maybe not when I'm reading the entire anthology, but a more selective reading period, and that would be Surface Tension by James Blish and The Game of Rat and Dragon by Corda Weiner Smith. But yeah, so I'm not entirely sure how far, much further I'm going to get into the big book of science fiction this coming weekend. I don't know how much we'll have the Four Children of the Apocalypse, but we shall see. And hopefully, as I get further in, I will like more of the stories. So, for New Worlds November, I read 2 books. I'm quite pleased that I managed to finish both of them. First up is The Brilliant Abyss, exploring the majestic hidden life of the deep ocean and the looming threat that imperils it, by Helen Scales. This is a work. I'm sorry. It's been quite a few days since I made a video, so I'm a bit rusty. So this is a book that looks at the depths of the oceans. It's divided into 4 parts. First part is an overview of the biology of the deep, from mid-ocean through to the abyss. And it looks at the various species, how are they discovered, a bit about them. Also features quite a bit of Scales' own research, and it's a bit of a memoir of her time on the Pelican. The second part is about how we depend on the deep, and namely through the carbon cycle. Essentially what happens is algae, diatoms, ocean-going plants essentially absorb carbon, and as they die they fall to the bottom and eventually are passed on either through the food chain or as snow into the bottom, where they are eventually consumed by the planet in a subduction zone and are recycled, essentially. Also how the climate too, as the oceans absorb a massive amount of heat. And of course the how various animals in the depths can inspire new medicines. The third part is exploitation, or exploit. And here it looks like how humans exploit the oceans and the deeps. First by fishing, second by pretty much turning the ocean into a giant junkyard, and third by mining, which I did not actually know there were any, that oceanic mining was a thing outside of oil rigs. But apparently it is, namely in 3 areas. The little nodules of metal, sort of like pearls, although not created by oysters. And then hydrothermal vents, and then on seamounts. And Helen Scales is most certainly not a fan of the prospect of oceanic mining. Her takedown of the ridiculous arguments for sustainable mining are brilliant, and probably quite true. And then the final part is about how what we preserve, sort of a conclusion and a call to preserve the ocean depths and the abyss. And so I really enjoyed it. This book was fantastic. And keeping with the theme of the ocean, I reread Wild Sea, A History of the Southern Ocean by Joy McCann. This is a look at the Southern Ocean and the history of the discovery and the exploration of the Southern Ocean. And this book does touch on quite a few subjects that Helen Scales in The Brilliant Abyss touches on as well, and it is fantastic. I read this last year and loved it, and I reread it this year and loved it. It is a rather brilliant book. So, what will I be reading next week? Obviously, I will be continuing this weekend with the big book of science fiction. And hopefully, I will have a better weekend than I did last weekend. Once Monday rolls around, I will be reading 2 more nonfiction histories this time for NonFiction November. First up is Building an American Empire, The Era of Territorial and Political Expansion by Paul Fymer. And if I get enough time, I will also aim to read Raised to Rule, Educating Royalty at the Court of the Spanish Habsburg, 1601 to 1634 by Martha K. Hoffman. And I'm looking forward to both. I don't know if I'll be able to read both of these over the course of the reading of the work week, but it would be nice. And if not, then obviously Raised to Rule will be read the following week. So before I let you go, there are a few other things I wanted to talk about besides obviously have all the guests I've had, or the invasion of the 4 children of the apocalypse. I love them, but they can be a bit much. Anyway, so NonFiction November. I had thought to do NonFiction November this year, but I've decided not to. And I don't know why I keep trying to do NonFiction November. November is the absolute worst time for me to write a 50,000 word novel in 30 days. Because not only is it Thanksgiving, but it is also my birthday month and my mother's birthday month. And it's also the lead up to Christmas. So so really November should be a vacation month. Also, given how I tend to write and construct my stories, I need a lot more time than just Preptober or October to really work on something. But I decided to give NonFiction November another chance, and so I was going to do a space opera. Partly inspired by New Worlds November, but also Space Opera September, a reading event in which participants read space opera in the month of September. And while I liked my idea, there's something's missing. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's a lot more research I need to do. And a lot more thought I need to give it. And so I moved from my space opera idea to a more realistic idea that has been percolating in the back of my mind for quite some time. And while I do like the idea, I'm just not entirely sure how to connect it. Like the various scenes I see, I don't know how to connect it. So that led me back to Scorpius, my superhero story. And even there, while I'm absolutely loving creating more stories in this setting and more arcs, which really argue that Scorpius should be a superhero comic book rather than a novel series, because I don't really want to do novel series. I've also really run up against a roadblock, and I finally figured out what the problem is. For me, Scorpius, based on the monster from Greek mythology, this giant scorpion that was summoned by Gaia and Artemis to fight the hunter Orion, who threatened to kill all animal life on Earth, and then also later defended the stars against Phaeton when he drove the Sun Chariot too far away from Earth. That I see Scorpius as a sort of a defensive, protective entity, and with an environmental mandate. But the stories I'm kind of generating aren't really environmentally focused. They're very much standard superhero fare. And that I think that disconnect is sort of one of my problems with Scorpius as an idea. I'm not entirely sure how to work in environmental themes into my story. And so I don't know whether I should retool it to where my hero's another character or what. But anyway, so I've had a bit of creative frustration this month too. Anything else? So I've got quite a few books that I've picked up in the month of November. The next book I get, whether it's the one I bought for my birthday, my brother gave me a Barnes & Noble gift card, and I bought one book with it. Whether that comes in either tomorrow or Monday, or the pre-order I get in on Tuesday, whichever comes in first, will be my 900th book. So I'm quite excited about that. I might throw a little bit of a party for that. And then I've got about 4 orders coming in. A birthday present, and there's one from Pals, my Amazon pre-order, and one from the University of Chicago Press, which shipped yesterday, which I ended up buying on my birthday. My birthday was rather depressing, and I gave myself a late night pick-me-up with a Powell's order, the storied independent bookstore in Portland, Oregon, and the University of Chicago, which is having a sale right now. Not as big as the one they had earlier this year, but it's pretty nice sale, and I bought 4 books with them, and that should be coming in either late next week or early the following week. So anyway, I'm quite looking forward to my November book haul and putting them on the history shelf. So anyhow, BookTube, I'm rambling, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now. I don't know what videos I'll be making next week except for weekly reads. The alphabet tag series has ended, so I need to find some new tags for the week. I might try to do a discussion video, even though I'm not really good at them, outside of perhaps using weekly reads as a base and then building on those after I've talked about the books, or what. So we'll see. And of course, I'm not entirely sure how often we'll be watching The 4 Children of the Apocalypse and exactly when they will be coming. So anyway, BookTube, I will hopefully see you next week, certainly for weekly reads, if nothing else. But until then, BookTube, thank you. Have a great evening and weekend, and I will see you sometime next week. Until then, stay safe.